Happy Wednesday, everybody. Today I want to talk about some tips for getting speed matching done properly so you can enjoy your models instead of fighting them on your layout. So we're back on the main layout and we're just going to watch trains run today while I talk over some topics. Last week I reached out to the community and got some good ideas for weathering and doing my wood chip car project. So I have to get some stuff ordered. I hope to have some things next week. I don't know if that's going to happen, so there's going to be a break in that series going forward. I want to definitely try some of the things that were offered up to me. So I appreciate the community feedback, and it was very helpful. But today, I want to jump into something that comes up on my channel a lot. I get a lot of DM messages about this, and recently I had a patron reach out to me. He was kind of deep diving on getting engines speed matched, and I have done speed matching on my channel before, but I feel like it's worth jumping into again. So I'm going to go over some of the things you need to be aware of when you go ahead and start getting your consists ready to run together. While I was setting up for my weekly running videos, I was playing with some engines, doing some speed matching tests just to make sure that I'm not crazy. But something that is probably the first step, even when you get a new engine, is to go ahead and set your CV8 to 8, or there are some other possibilities out there, but essentially reset your decoder so everything's back to factory defaults. At that point, it is pertinent to go ahead and start adjusting some CVs. The first thing I would do when speed matching an engine to an unknown other engine, whatever, go ahead and set your CV3 and your CV4 to 0. This takes out any momentum your engine might have, and it makes speed matching with other engines substantially easier. Once you've done that, you need to determine how you're going to go about speed matching those engines. Do you want to have a reference engine? Do you own a speedometer and want everything set up running a specific speed? That's kind of some considerations you need to take in. Also, you need to consider what you plan on using the engine for. For example, those F7 GNs that are pulling the passenger train, I generally want them running a little bit faster than the freight engines that's pulling my protein gondolas right now. In general, passenger trains tend to go a lot faster. Now, I don't have the biggest layout in the world. This is essentially a 3x8 loop. So really high speed engines are just not a thing on my layout. So for the most part, I generally don't run my engines any faster than about half throttle. So that being said, you kind of need to determine a max speed that you want your engines to run at. So all of these examples moving forward is not using the speedometer. Now, when I move to the end game layout, when I have a place to put a full-sized layout, something that isn't just a couple loops, I want all of my engines to function as a speed step equals a mile an hour. So I have 126 speed steps. I want all of those to equal the speed that you're at. And that will make speed matching all of my engines on the final layout really easy and very intuitive. So it also allows me to set up speed zones when I am doing some of my districting at that point. However, most people, when you're to that point, you have a very good understanding of how your engines work. So this is really for that, not necessarily newcomer, but guy that is moving into having more engines on your layout. First thing I would do at that point is go ahead and put the engine that you want to be your reference engine on your main loop. and turn the throttle up to 100 and just see how fast the thing goes. And if it's Kato or a Broadway or a Scale Trains, they tend to cook pretty good around the layout at that point. So if you can, and if you have a controller that does this, it is a lot of help in this situation. Programming on the main is really great for speed matching. It allows you to do some things that you can't normally do with other situations. But in this case, just take your CV5, which is your max speed, and put it, say, at a value of 100, and just kind of judge the speed at which your engine goes. If that's a good maximum speed for you, it looks nice in scale, and you're happy with it, great, keep that value. Move it up for a little more speed, bring it down if you think the engine's going too fast. Depending on the decoder you're using or the type of engine you've purchased, this can radically alter the characteristics of the engine. I noticed with my TCS controllers and my Katos, when I set my top speed, it's pretty much identical across all of my Katos. Different engines, all the same decoders, it works. Now, when I had NCE and Digitrax decoders in those same engines, the values were drastically different. And some of that comes down to whether or not you have back EMF enabled on your decoder. I recommend always running back EMF. There are certain places on the internet that say run it on your lead engine in your consist and then turn it off in all the others. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I did a power move in my last week videos with all of my Broadways. I just hooked them up and ran them stock configuration, stock speed matches. It just worked. Now, that could possibly change if you are running high-speed models. As you start to move up into the higher-end speed tables, motors definitely react differently to voltages at that point. So that is something to consider when you're doing this. But if you can, have back EMF enabled, and then go and check your CV2 at this point and try to get it as low as you can. And when you put one speed step on, the engine should just start to move slowly. And that's what you're looking for. You want a nice, slow, but steady speed step 1 CV number. It might take 2 or 3. It might take 5 or 10. Don't worry so much if the engine kind of jerks forward when it first starts. That is the back EMF. It spikes the voltage just a little bit to get the engine moving, and then comes back down to the CV value or the voltage value that you put in. Motors need a certain amount of jolt to get them started. On DC motors, it's just a little bit of a voltage spike. On brushless motors, it could be called cogging. This is something you see a lot in RC cars. You need a little bit of a hit to get the motor moving, and that's what back EMF is doing for your engine. It helps get it up to speed and then maintain that motor rotational torque, I think, at different ranges. So not only does it help keep you going, but in my testing, I have found if you keep back EMF enabled, going up hills and whatnot, it really tries to keep the engine moving at the same speed, whether you're moving up a hill or trying to keep the engine from accelerating coming down a hill. And that's really important. Once you have your slow speed figured out and your upper speed figured out, you can kind of pick your mid voltage wherever you want it to be. I personally like a nice linear performance curve. It's something you can kind of test if you have a speedometer. If you don't, it's just kind of by eye. But you roughly pick a value for your CV6 that's somewhere halfway in between your CV2 and your CV5 value. This might seem simple for anyone who's done this a lot before, but for the beginner, it can be a little bit confusing. Once you kind of have that figured out, you've got your CV2, 6, and 5 in place, kind of run through those speed steps on your layout and make sure it is a relatively linear thing. Like as you turn the throttle up, your engine slowly goes faster. Once your reference engine is where you like it, this is where being able to program on the main is really beneficial. If you plan on putting those engines together in a more permanent consist, like these Great Northerns I have right here, set them up in the orientation that you want them, and go ahead and set the max speed for your lead reference engine. Just go ahead and turn it up all the way, and put the value that you had in that CV5 in your secondary engine. At this point, let them run around the layout chasing each other. If they're close in speed, great. If not, increase or decrease that CV until it stays relatively close with that engine. They don't have to be perfect. Once that's the case, go ahead and slow them all the way down to speed step 1 again and do the same thing. Turn up speed step, the CV for speed step 2, or excuse me, let me start all over there. Your CV2 value for speed step 1 on your secondary engine, slowly start raising it until it just starts to move and is nice and smooth. Again, it can be as low as 1 all the way up to 3, 5, 10. It kind of depends on the decoder. Now go ahead and set your consist speed 1 click below half. So on my layout, I use 126 speed steps, so 62 is a good place for me. You're still in that lower speed curve, but you're at the max end of it. And if you're on a Digitrax system or whatnot, try to get to 49. Now, if you're using the potentiometer style, like a DCS 51, DCS 52, you kind of just have to try it out. You can kind of cheat the system. You can set your mid voltage as your max voltage and turn the dial all the way up and come back just a little bit, and you can do that. But go ahead and do the same thing. Try to get those mid voltages while they're running, chasing each other around the layout so they're nice and close. At this point, most engines will pretty much run together in all situations. Forward or backwards, you can change most of the orientations, especially with back EMF. It really helps in that situation. But I think this is the point where people get a little bit too stuck on the details. When they're running together with no load behind them, they can have a little bit of difference in speed. They don't have to be perfect, because once they're hooked up and pulling a load, you're going to notice that they don't totally react the same. You are going to have coupler lash between those two engines regardless of what you do. Unfortunately, the way it works, and even in the prototype, there's coupler lash between engines and cars while running on the main. So this is totally normal. The rear engine tends to pull more load. It's hooked up to the cars, and it deals with the grunt force of pulling those things. As you move up and down through hills, you're going to see that they react differently to one another. Now, there is a distinct advantage to running multiple engines, and I hope starting next year, I'm going to start testing engines for this. I'm relatively confident I have a way that I can actually properly scientifically test my theory here. But engines work together, and they have kind of a anti-slip mechanism. As the rear engine starts to slip or the front one starts to slip, the other one kind of tends to run into it, because as soon as you start to slip, you lose speed, and it kind of helps grab it. It's like a traction control system. I don't have proof for it yet, but I plan on actually proving this, that two engines are drastically superior to one engine. So one engine might be able to pull 10 cars, two engines can pull 22 cars, that type of thing. So once I can get that set up, I'm going to start going into that. But there is a definite advantage to having consisted engines. And I'm going to pull my camera off here and see if I can get this in frame. I don't know if you could quite see that, but those engines had lash. They were kind of moving back and forward between one another. Now, these engines are perfectly speed matched. Like, I spent a lot of time getting them in a good speed match, and it's just inevitable because of the way the engines interact with one another. You're gonna have some lash between those engines, so don't sweat the small stuff. They just have to be close to run well together. There is one indicator that your engines are not speed matched very well, and you can especially hear this on the flaps. It is kind of a slipping noise. When you stop an engine, you can kind of hear the wheels spinning on the rails. If on a flat and you're not pulling a significant load, if you can kind of hear one of those engines slipping a little bit, there's a good chance that you're too far out of speed match. And that's really the only thing you need to look for. So I will say there is a place in the community, and this I think comes more from the DC days when speed matching was much more difficult, that said you would put the faster engine in the rear because it was going to pull more load and it would slow down, and you'd run the slower engine up front. And then some people would argue with that, saying no, you want the faster engine up front, it's just going to pull the slower one, and it's just the slower one, because there's less load on it, the wheels are just going to spin faster and whatnot. There's probably truth both ways. Personally, I have found that when running big consists, the only thing that really matters to that point is if there is an engine that is prone to derailing while pushing, you will run into an issue. And I have this with a couple of my Katos. I can't run them as the rear engine in the consist. They work just fine in the middle, but as they come around a corner, especially over on this corner over here, right down over there, where you're descending and then coming onto a flat, there's kind of a bump right there. It will try to push the engine off of the rails because it's trying to force those two engines behind it forward a little bit. Now that's in a descending situation. I just generally try to keep those engines in the middle of the consist or up front, and you don't have a problem. They're actually pretty decently speed matched with the other engines, but it's just something that I run into. The other consideration is if you have a slightly slower engine, and when I say slightly, I mean slightly, they tend to work the best as your rear of train or mid-train DPU. What ends up happening is, especially in a descending consist type situation, you're coming down a hill, if the engine at the rear of the train is faster than the front ones, it will force all of the cars forward, and sometimes that will cause, especially coupler mounted trucks, to want to derail here and there. If that engine in the rear is a little bit slower than the front ones, you don't really have to worry about this as much because it's always trailing a little bit. It's actually holding the train back a little bit coming down a hill. Going up a hill, you think that would be detrimental. However, I have found in most of my testing that that is not the case. When you are pulling a heavy train, those lead engines take up the load, and they will slow down pretty substantially pulling a hill most times. In which case, that rear engine has time to kind of catch up, take all of the coupler slack between all of the cars you're trying to pull and push in this situation. And usually by the time you're done pulling the hill, it all kind of comes out in the wash. So if you do have an engine that you just can't quite get speed matched properly, it runs just a little bit slow, try running it as a rear train DPU. You'll probably find that it works really well in that situation. So this has kind of just been a PSA. I've been getting this question a lot, and I had a Patreon subscriber, like I said, try to deep dive on this, and I got no problem answering questions. I'm happy to do so. That's what I'm here for. But I do find that a lot of people really struggle with this when they first start, and it really is something you shouldn't worry about. You just have to get things close for it to work properly. So thanks for stopping by, everybody. I hope to have product in next week so we can start working on our wood chip cars, but it is kind of that season, so I don't know if it'll happen. So I will see you this Friday for the rolling stock review, and have a good rest of your week. Bye now.